Well, hi and welcome to the first session of this little teaching series that I've put together and called Building an Altar at Home. That might sound like a strange title, but it comes from a verse from 1 Samuel. A few months ago I was reading through the book of 1 Samuel, and this little verse from chapter 7 really just leapt out and struck me at the time, and it just has been sort of mulling around in my mind, and I just thought I'd put something together on this theme. This is what the verse says, starting to read in verse 15. It says, Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. But he always went back to Ramah, where his home was, and there he also held court for Israel, and he built an altar there to the Lord. And I think the thing that struck me was just this sort of picture of Samuel, this great leader, this great prophet, heading around the country, ministering in all those different places, but always returning to home, this place called Ramah, where his home was, and there building an altar to the Lord, a place where he might meet with God for himself in his home, in his hometown. And I guess we live in these very strange times, don't we, where a lot of the things that we used to have available to us that helped us to encounter the Lord have been taken away from us. We're no longer able to meet together as a church family on a Sunday morning. Obviously we can meet virtually and all those sorts of things, but we don't meet in the same place. Things like life groups, Bible study groups, prayer groups, those things have been stopped as well because of the situation that we're in. And so many of those places that we would go to that would help us encounter God have stopped, and they've been taken away from us. And so I just wanted to think a little bit about how do we build a relationship with the Lord at home? How do we do that on our own or with our immediate family, rather than going to these different places that we've been used to in the past? Now, for many of you, you'll be really familiar with that. You'll have a really great regular pattern of prayer and Bible reading, and that will sustain you through this season. But for others, that might be something new to you. It might not be something that you've ever really put into practice or experimented with. And so I just wanted to record these simple, short videos to try and help you out and to help you think about how you might build that place of encounter, that place of connection with God at home. And so in order to do that, to begin with today, I just want to think a little bit about the teaching of Jesus. So if you've got a Bible with you, turn to Matthew chapter 6. It's part of Jesus' teaching that we call the Sermon on the Mount, and it's the section where he talks about prayer and fasting, and during that section he also gives to us what we call the Lord's Prayer. It's Matthew chapter 6 and beginning at verse 5. It's really interesting. In Luke's Gospel, the disciples come up to Jesus and they say to him, Lord, teach us how to pray. I think that's an amazing question. When you think about who Jesus was and what Jesus did, you think about the fact that he fed 5,000 people with just a small packed lunch. He turned water into wine. He raised the dead. He healed the sick. Did so many incredible miracles. And yet the time when the disciples come to him and ask him to teach them something, what they ask him to teach them is, Lord, teach us how to pray. They saw something in Jesus' own devotional life, his own prayer life, that they wanted to be able to emulate for themselves. And that question leads Jesus to unpacking some teaching on prayer and giving to them the Lord's Prayer itself. That's in Luke's Gospel. We're reading from Matthew, but it's basically the same teaching that Jesus offers. And so this is what it says. It says, when you pray, this is Jesus speaking, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven. And he then recites to them the Lord's Prayer. We're going to look at a number of different things in this series, but to begin with, I just want to talk about three very practical things that Jesus offers to us in this teaching. The first thing is when he speaks about prayer, he encourages us to find a time. He then encourages us to find a place, and he offers to us a plan of what to do when we find ourselves in that time and in that place. So the first thing is a time. Everything that we do requires an amount of time, and if something's important, it's worth investing time in. And if it's important and worth investing time in, then it's worth diarising that time. It's worth putting it in the diary, making it regular, and protecting it in some way. The context into which Jesus was speaking was a context that was familiar with times of prayer. The Jewish sort of life was punctuated by daily prayer, different times of the day where people would stop what they were doing and they would pray. And those times were set by the times of prayer that took place in the temple. And so people in Jesus' context were familiar with the idea of a time where they stopped and they prayed. That isn't something that's quite so familiar to us. But I think one of the things that Jesus is encouraging us to do, and I think one of the things that is just really, really helpful as we seek to develop a prayer life, is to allocate a certain amount of time during the day, usually the same time each day, that we'll set aside and we'll devote that to prayer and to meeting with Jesus. The second thing is that Jesus talks about having a place. He says, go into your room, close the door and pray. And although of course we can pray to God anywhere, at any time, God is always there and we're always able to commune with him, there is something quite helpful about having a set place where we sit or stand or kneel or whatever it is that we do in order to pray. There's something about creating that space that just helps us move into that place of prayer. I just have a simple chair in the corner of one of our rooms, and it tends to be that's the place where I go to pray and my daily time of prayer. It's not essential, but it's a useful tool as we seek to develop a prayer life. And the third thing I think that Jesus offers us in terms of just practical advice here is that it's good to have a plan. Jesus gave to his disciples the Lord's Prayer as a model or a plan, if you like, for how they should pray. And we're going to look at what it is to have a plan, and we're going to look at the Lord's Prayer and various other plans that we might make use of in future videos, but just want to highlight for a moment that it's useful to have a plan. So, find a time. Don't bite off more than you can chew. If you're somebody who has never really prayed before on your own, don't set aside an hour. You may find that extremely difficult and it might be discouraging and sort of crush you and you might fall at the first hurdle. Similarly, if you're somebody who doesn't really ever get out of bed before 8 o'clock, don't decide that your time of prayer is going to be at 5 o'clock in the morning. Because again, you might find that just way too difficult and you might fall again at the first hurdle. We're not trying to sort of compete with one another or have the most impressive pattern of prayer. We're just simply trying to find something that works for us and for our daily routine. So to find a time in your day that works for you and is manageable. It's much better for something to grow, for it to start small and to grow, than for it to start way too big and not be manageable at all. Again, think of a place. Once you've thought of a time, think of a place. It might just be a simple place in your home, or if the weather's nice, in your garden. Choose somewhere that's peaceful, that's away from distractions. Obviously, if you're home at the moment with young children, that's more challenging. But try and find a place that can be your place of prayer. And if necessary, let people know that when you're heading to that place, it's because you just need 5 minutes in which to pray. So have a think for the rest of this day. about when might be your time in the day that you're going to devote to prayer, and think about the place that you're going to choose to do that. And in our next session, we're going to think about what we do when we find ourselves in that time and that place. We're going to think about a plan. So I hope that's helpful, and do check out the next video to take it a little further.